Welcome everyone to a quality conversation on the future of meat. For any of you that go to AgTech conferences, you're probably used to seeing a fair bit of discussion about the meat complex at events like this. But often it's focused on actually the development of substitutes, the meat analogues or the cellular alternatives that are coming forward. Or it's on the important areas of the feeds that are being developed that are going to reduce the methane emissions of livestock. But it's important to remember that meat itself remains very much the main game here. In terms of market size, it dwarfs all novel substitutes. And despite the impression you might get from mainstream media, consumption of red meat is still very much growing. And red meat is evolving to even better meet market needs. And that's the best response to competition in any field. So in this session, we are going to explore the bold innovations, opening up new opportunities for the red meat and livestock industry in its quest for ever improving quality. To lead us through this, please welcome to the stage Dr. Peter McGilchrist, Professor of Meat Science at the University of New England, and Mick Crowley, Managing Director of MLA. Gentlemen, the stage is yours.
Thanks, Tim, and ladies and gentlemen, thanks very much for having us here today. And we're up on stage to have a bit of a fireside chat. So if anyone's got a lighter, we might just light these things up and get the fire going pretty quickly. It's a pleasure to be here with you, Mick, and talking about a lot of the work we've done over the last 7 or 8 years around meat technologies. And this is all about, as Tim said, delivering greater consistency and evenness of product to our consumer, because in any food industry, the only people that part with that money is that consumer. So we have to give them what they want more readily every day. So luckily in Australia, we've had the Meat Standards Australia system for beef, which was developed in the late 90s. So it's over 30 years old now, or getting towards that. And it's come a long way, and you'll all be familiar with the standards we have around meat colour and ossification score, and we use humans to assess these traits. The good old humble marble chips here, of course, really important. So we've got a system in beef, this prediction algorithm that predicts these cut by cook outcomes. So this muscle from that animal, if we cook it like this, will be good, better, or best, essentially. And in sheep meat, so we've had that system, and we've been using human graders to do that very successfully for all those years. But the time has come to move into a few of these new traits. Whereas in the sheep industry, we've really had a supply chain system. So if they're 2 weeks off shears and they're growing this fast on farm and they have this long between the paddock and the knocking box, then they're kind of in or out. So the sheep system was very in or out. And to get to individual animal grading for sheep, we needed some of these technologies that we'll discuss in a bit to be able to grade individual animals. I'm not sure how many of you have been in a lamb processing plant, but the one near me in Tamworth, they process it or harvest it 850 lambs an hour. Now that's a lamb every 4.2 seconds. Do you reckon humans are any good at grading quality at that level? No way. Maybe for the first 3 lambs of 850. But so we need technologies in that space to enable that cut by cook outcome. But Mick, let's get into it around this consumer, and we've got a really strong domestic market. But where do our consumers sit around the world?
Yeah, look, and I think that's part of the success of these programs is that we've always put the consumer very much in the centre of when we're thinking about what do we need to do as a production system. Putting the consumer in the room with us gets you thinking outside of just what we need to do on farm and how do we produce more volume. It's also about who is it for. And our consumers are global. We think about the consumer and the customer in an international landscape. Our domestic market competes for the product on a global stage these days. I mean, our industry across beef, lamb, mutton and goat was worth $40 billion last year. Our domestic market is still our largest and most valuable market, but we saw the demand for protein globally continuing to be very, very strong. For the first time, we saw the US being the largest market across all 3 species. And that is just unbelievable. And it's amazing how they're one of our biggest customers, but also one of our competitors that we go head to head in some of our major markets. Japan, Korea, and China, as well as the US, make up our big 4 export markets. And when we compete on quality, and that's when we can differentiate ourselves, we also go up against that US product on a day-to-day basis. So a shortage of supply out of the US, growing demand domestically within the US itself, has created opportunities for us on the global stage. So we are seeing big opportunities there. And then we also access those markets under free trade agreements. So about 85% of our exports are now covered by favourable trade conditions that reduce economic barriers to trade and keep us competitive on a global stage. But I guess, Pete, I think about what's going to keep us competitive as we go forward, and what are those signals that we're getting from customers and consumers that are going to change the way our production sector needs to respond. And I think the technology and the way we work with processors and brand owners, we can work forward in the supply chain, post-farm gate, but equally getting that information back to producers and thinking about how we need to redesign the way we produce animals with that changing customer and consumer landscape.
Yeah, and so I guess this data, yes, going forward to the consumers, but how does it also help us in giving better feedback to our producers to allow that selection intensity?
Yeah, that's right. And I've thought a lot about it just from how do we operate differently as a supply chain. We've done a good job over the years of investing in genetics and on-farm productivity, the feedlotting sector, looking at technology, but we don't extract value and benefits until we start getting rewarded for doing things differently and producing animals in a certain way. So I've been thinking about the concept. It's not a new concept around value-based marketing, but I think where we sit today in terms of the insights, the data, the technology, the tools that we have available to us, we can transform the way we operate as a supply chain and start looking at where we create and capture value that ultimately delivers a return and improves profitability on farm, but equally creates those opportunities for us to differentiate against our competitors. How do we reduce cost of production? But equally, if we're being asked to do more by our customers, how do we get paid more for doing that? Because quite often the adoption of new tech and new practice changes, it requires infrastructure, it requires software systems, we need data flow, there's a lot of investment needed. So if we do more, we need to get more out the other end. And I guess that's where, I think there's a really interesting tipping point where we come up with a lot of the technologies, but we still have to drive adoption. We still have to create the value proposition that drives the culture of how we engage with using technology to come up with some of those solutions.
And the sheep industry, Mick, is probably a good one. Forever and a day we've looked at how many teeth a lamb has got and then put all the lamb we produce in this country in one box and call it lamb.
Yeah, that's right.
And there's no differentiation. In beef, we've been lucky to have MSA for many years, and we can segregate beef into beef brands and sell them at different prices. So if we think about lamb, this has really enabled that MSA and the individual measurement of that, of those lambs. Also, back to your breeders, we're kind of breeding into the dark, right? Like we're selecting better animals genetically, but when those lambs get to the processor, we're getting weight and some pulpated fat score back. Like it's a best guess at what's kind of hanging on a hook. It doesn't tell you anything, right? So this movement also allows producers to select better animals, but then assess that, what is the phenotypes of those outcomes.
Yep.
We might just discuss a few of the tech now that are going to enable that. So I brought a few along with me, and so this is probably one of the early ones. So has anyone used an NIR to measure anything, like on your header or when you take your wheat into the silo or whatever? This is a miniaturized NIR. So this is a little technology out of Japan. And they were measuring the amount of fat in tuna. We said, hey, dudes, if you can measure the amount of fat in tuna, don't you reckon you can measure the amount of fat we've got in our lambs? And they said, yeah, we'll have a crack at it. Anyway, so it took a long time, but this is a great little handheld device, but it requires a cold lamb and also a cut surface. So it's not for everyone, but for genetic analysis, you know, it's much cheaper to use this and put that data into LambPlan than take a bit of loin, take it back to my lab, you know, those.
Yeah, the reference population piece is really expensive, and if the technology can get us there faster, then that's just fantastic. So we have followed a lot of those lambs through from having the resource flock that's been run, big spread of breeds and types within those breeds, genetic diversity, following that through all the way to slaughter. That's been a fantastic reference group to get the diversity across the whole, all the IMF ranges within the sheep industry, to get these devices accredited and ready for use commercially.
And so that, for instance, this one, the genetic correlation between IMF coming out of my lab at University of New England compared to this is 0.93. So LambPlan said, well, that's the same. So we can now phenotype lambs using this and have all that, because a lamb's not very good to breed from once you've measured their meat quality. I'll give you the tip. And this is another cool one. So this is still in development phase. So this has been through, this one is, I don't know whether you can see those tiny little red lights, and they just built this one for me to play with and to show you guys. But this is called optical coherence tomography. You don't need to know that. Anyone that's had a brain injury, then this has probably been in your brain, but of course not that big. So this came out of the medical industry because it's really important when you're having a brain operation not to sever the blood vessels. Right, so blood is mostly protein, and your brain is white matter or fat. So, and they use optical coherence tomography to look for those margins so the surgeons don't actually nick them. We said, well, if you can get down to that capillary level in someone's brain, surely you can see marbling and, you know, the difference between meat and fat in a lamb loin, and now there's longer ones to going into beef. And they said, yeah, I think we can. So, you know, that's from concept, the first needle we had was a human brain operation needle in the plant. Now, they were hellishly worried about breaking that off. We had to check it every time, but now we've come up with this robust design. So you push it in, and then as you come out, then that handle, so it's very ergonomic, very easy to use, and the wavelength of the light can be calculated. So if you pull it out really fast or you pull it out really slow, it calculates in the brain behind it what that does, and it basically essentially looks muscle fat, and it works out that percentage. So again, at line speed, you can do
keeping up with chain speed that you were talking about.
Yeah,
before.
15 or 16 a minute, that one can keep up with easily.
Fantastic.
So that's above what any of our chain speeds go at the moment.
Yep.
So not only have these things got to be accurate, and that's the role we play in research, is grabbing some of these technologies. Now, how many medicos have you ever seen in an abattoir? Not many, right? But they've got the technology we needed to enable that. So we take them on that journey and facilitate that. And the important thing in that really early phases is how accurate is it of measuring that trait we want. And that's everything about tech development in that really early phase. And then as soon as we say, yep, it can do it, then what takes over?
Yeah, well, that's right. I think the innovation pipeline is a really interesting one. We've been working on objective carcass measurement for years. And when we solve the tech issue, we still have the cultural issue about how do we transition the industry across to start using the technology for payment systems, and how do we use the data coming out of that device to drive improvements in our production systems. So now that we have the ability in the sheep industry to measure IMF at chain speed, and here's a beef device, it's just got a phone in the back of it. We can take the image of the ribeye, punch in all of the traits that you can measure visually, and so we're improving the accuracy big time, but we still need to create the value proposition.
So just on that, before you jump on the value proposition, the repeatability of a camera, so 3 cameras against 3 graders, is on most traits is kind of 30 to 50% higher. So we've proven that, and that's where the value comes in, is getting that repeatability of measurement. But we've got a system that works, but the value is in that repeatability piece.
Yeah, so we're collecting the same traits, but where we've seen value truly created is in brands, and the brands that get closer to the consumer are capturing more value because they've developed depth of the brand. It's not just a nice box, not nice lid on a box that goes into the trade. It tells a story, it communicates to a consumer, it ends up on a menu, ends up at point of sale in retail, both domestically and internationally. And what happens is that those brands that have built brand equity have worked more closely with their supply base to drive those changes because the market specification improves, the producer gets rewarded by hitting the sweet spot on a grid. All of the data then gets shared, and we see equal value in sharing that information. And because the industry through MLA has invested, we can put some things in place that make that data flow. We're investing big time in our data capability to get that data back to the breeder, not just the last owner.
Yep.
Then we unlock value. And I think for the sheep industry, they get to learn a lot about that journey from the beef side.
Yep.
And because, as you said, Pete, like lamb has such a strong position in the market, the opportunity, but we know there's variation. So the opportunity is to use the technology to identify those premium cuts that go into high-end food service, to go into those customer lines that will value the brand, that want more consistency, that are really wanting to make sure it is a premium product they're putting on the plate every day. And we're very fortunate that our livestock producers care a lot about quality. They've been selecting for improving IMF in the sheep industry for a number of years without getting paid for it. But here's the opportunity. And we are seeing supply chains pay serious premiums above their base forward contract price for hitting quality and yield thresholds that are rewarding producers directly. So it can come together, but that's a culture change piece that we need to work on. And the tech is an enabler to help us get there because we're running out of excuses not to do this. And I think for both beef and sheep, there's some pretty big upside opportunity. And we see the variation that exists when we start measuring those traits and collecting the data. And even if we don't pay for it initially and get the feedback going, people will do something with it. And there's a real need. And the other bit that I like is that it's a win-win.
Yep.
So I guess I'm interested too, Pete. And so how do we invest in the next phase? And how do we bring that innovation pipeline to life, knowing that there are some headwinds? I mean, yes, demand is growing. We've got cost of living pressures. I was talking to Belinda Lowe before about the government's decision to ban live export in 2028. There's pressures on our industry. We've had labour challenges, processing capacity issues, but we're now in a position where we have the luxury of thinking about what does 2030 need to look like. And when we invest today, what does that need to look like to get us to where we need to go over the next 5 years?
Yeah, and as you talked about in lamb, like I always say, like all lamb's good, but some's amazing, right? And we're not making any money out of that amazing stuff at the moment. And as you say, we've been talking about quality, and maybe the producers get sick of us talking about it when there's no price incentives. Finally, it's come. But they lead out. That's a long lag time. Like genetic progress is a long thing, and we're there. And essentially, technology's had to come up to speed to allow us to extract that value for those high level ones.
Yeah, yeah. There's certainly been some success stories, and I think about the journey we've been on with objective carcass measurement technology. Where we made the biggest strides forward was when we had processors, producers, researchers, service providers, the tech companies, as well as the research and development corporations designing a program of work that allowed us to use the specialist skills that exist in our research organisations, but having the target customer in the room working together on how we'd use the technology got us there. Osmeat, these devices are all accredited through Osmeat to be able to be used commercially. Yeah, but we don't have people falling over themselves to take it on. So the next phase of that to me is how do we de-risk the adoption? How do we design the program of work that where you truly understand the value proposition for each individual business? But I think the true how we get there faster is collaborating and using those skills and building on each other's ideas. Now that's not collusion. I want to make sure that that's all really clear because we want competition in the marketplace, but designing where the industry needs to go and taking people along for the journey is a really important component of that. And I think there's an ability for us to leverage the available funding that we have in the research space and becoming really applied and really practical in the application of where we can go, whilst being really aspirational about what level of impact we can deliver off the back of that investment. So there's a big part of how do we take everyone along for that journey, I suppose. But I guess, Pete, from your perspective, really leading in the meat science space with what you do at university, how do you see you working with your peers in other research institutions, and how does that sort of come together for you?
Yeah, as we've heard of lots over the last day and a half. Collaboration is king. You know, we'd get actually nowhere without it. And interesting, Mick, when we started this journey around technologies, IMF in lamb wasn't even a trait that anyone could get paid on. It didn't even exist in our language. So that was a really important part for research to set the standards on what is it?
Yep.
How accurate do the technologies need to be to measure it? And then working with the AusMeets to say, well, here's what we think your guidelines could be. You could adopt whatever you want. Funnily enough, they're the same. And to be able to, so then we can trade on IMF. You know, yield in lamb was another trait that didn't even exist. So we couldn't trade on lean meat yield. We could trade on weight. We could trade on fatness. Yield in beef is still not a trait. So there's, you know, a bit of work to still go looking at lean meat yield in beef. So yeah, but collaboration, we've worked widely across the world, you know, with companies from Germany, Denmark, Japan, a few here in Australia. The OCT comes out of Australia and Master Beef comes out of Australia. Across the ditch in New Zealand.
Yep.
You know,
We can look internationally as well for some solutions.
We're still looking, you know, and this innovation pipeline takes time. You know, one trait that's really important to us is tenderness.
Yep.
If we could get away from looking at the dentition of a sheep, I would be partying till the cows come home. Anyway, so but that's a really hard trait because it changes from fresh meat to cooked meat, right? And so scientifically, it's really difficult. And we've got a little project at the moment, don't get too excited, but using MRI. So anyone had an MRI on their busted knee or head or whatever you broke, we get them all the time. But using MRI technology, there's a bit of hope coming out of Brazilian teams and Chinese teams that we're looking at how they do that to predict tenderness. So if we could predict tenderness on an animal, you know, all of a sudden we don't have to look at dentition ever again.
Yeah.
Hallelujah. We could sell meat on sheep meat on quality, not on dentition categories. And that's kind of the holy grail and the goal there, to keep going. Yep, we've got a little way. But and you guys are setting that agenda. We need to just keep going, keep advancing, keep bringing things together to keep drawing more money out of our system.
Yeah, and I guess we've really focused today on the objective measurement technology because you can work with a small number of plants with a large number of suppliers and influence a large proportion of our production. We also can expand that because there are customer drivers, and when I talk about customer, I'm talking about big supermarket chains, the big food, quick service restaurant chains that are, as well as importing country requirements that influence the credentials that we're asked to provide when we're raising our livestock. We are seeing a lot more requests for information around environmental credentials, around animal welfare. We're getting heavily involved in conversations about human health and nutrition, the important role of livestock as part of a healthy diet, the role of livestock in being a significant part of the solution in delivering positive environmental outcomes. And I think if we start in the middle and understand what our customers want, we translate that into brand specifications, and payment systems will reward the right type of behaviour. We'll see the ability to have a genetic potential of the animals and feeding that forward into the supply chain. We can credential livestock so that they're valued more appropriately as we're feeding that information forward, and then connecting the feedback from the processor back through the supply chain. I mean, that to me will unlock significant value, allows us to stay ahead of the game, ahead of our competitors, because these are global movements. You know, environmental sustainability is not going away. We've made significant improvements in our net emissions as a sector, and we're seeing that targets both domestically and internationally continue to evolve, the language changes. But we've got a serious opportunity to lead and continue to be in a leading position and stay ahead of these big ticket items that we know are coming. So, look, I think it's a really exciting time to be in the red meat industry. Yes, it's challenging. We battle with the elements every day. There's tough seasonal conditions around the traps. We're seeing floods in the north, drought in the south. But resilience is at the heart of it. We've got tremendous people and will. And I think if we work together, we can really get there. But But Pete, yeah, it's a fascinating journey we've got ahead of us over the next 5 years, I reckon.
Absolutely, and you touched on a little bit before around the reference populations in sheep and beef, but we get this efficiency sometimes from having these big expensive projects that where we've got a lot of variability, but then we stack projects onto that. So you're talking about the human health aspect. You know,
Yep.
we're just launching into looking at the minerals or, you know, food as medicine sort of space, and of course people eat red meat for around the iron content. So what does genetics do to that? What does feed type do to that? You know, and being, in, as you say, in front of what the customer is demanding now, because if the customer is demanding something and we can't deliver it, we're behind.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we've got to think of these things well before it's a demand from our customers.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, if we find ourselves in a reactive position, we're already behind the game. So, yeah, and then the other component, I was listening to Lee Sales next door and previously, telling our story and being really authentic in the way we do that. No one more authentic than a livestock producer, and you know, I think we can build in our whole communication strategy, our marketing plans, and we end up with a pull-through model rather than a push model. So I think we're in really good shape to deliver the innovations of the future. Our counter's just gone 000. So we'll pull up there, but Pete, it's been awesome.
Thanks, Mick, and thanks everyone for coming along today.
Thank you.